what would make me happy. And that piece is you see on Instagram, on social media, on a book, in a blog, this is what happiness is, right? And this is how you can create more of it. Well, I wanted to know from a researcher standpoint. And so what I did to create this talk is I read over 350 scientific studies about happiness. I've read more books than I could possibly count. My bedside table looked like a recycle bin for a couple years. Blogs, anything. And when I reviewed the research, I threw out anything that had a payer mix that maybe made it biased, if there was a small N in the research study, if there was a medication that was funding the research. And so what I'm going to talk about today, if it comes up into something I'm going to share, it had to show up in 30 different studies to make it really stand out to me and say, okay, in 30 studies, this is really the evidence of what we need to be doing and looking at. So that is what I'm coming from. It's really going to be the science of happiness, and where we're going to discuss is really research studies. But I'll try to kind of not be all about research and really make it things that you can start or stop doing right now in your life. And, we need this more than we ever have. The world is a mess. I don't even need to have this slide. I mean, this is seriously something that we all recognize already. The world beyond us is something we cannot control. And so what I want to talk about today is things that you can do, right? Because everything else out there, politics, divorce rate, suicide, opioid epidemic, the whole thing, not all of that is in our control, but we can control ourselves. And that's what we really want to discuss. And so I think it's interesting, I've got children, they're adults now, they're in their 20s, and if somebody asks me, like, what do you want for them? Or what do you even want for yourself, right? Like, I just want to be happy, right? And that's this one-off sentence that we say, but what does that really look like? And, and how much energy do we really put into it? We woke up today and we took a shower and we thought about our day, right? And we washed our hair, and I thought about getting chicken out of the freezer for dinner. And I thought about stopping by the grocery store to pick up fresh basil for a salad. And I vowed to work out today. And I've, done all these things that, in my head, had conversations with my boss and I need to have later. But nowhere do we really think about, like, how am I going to incorporate happiness into my day today, right? And have a plan about that. And what we do is we want it to happen. We say it's the most important thing. We want to be happy, but we think that it's just going to arrive on our doorstep like a pizza delivery. And it's not. Happiness is a muscle. It takes really cognizant decisions to make ourselves happy. And that's what we want to talk about today. And so I'm going to click that. I don't know if you guys could see that, but it was telling me that we were being recorded there. And I recognize that. So happiness for all of us is a little bit different. But, by definition, I want to just make sure we're on the same page. It's how satisfied you are with your life and how good you feel on a daily basis. That's basically what science has come up with for what happiness is. And I want to kind of talk just a minute about what happiness is not, right? Because the data showed that happiness is not about money. Money is like health. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to be happy, but it definitely, having that worry removed can help make it a lot easier. According to a Princeton study, around $75,000 a year will get you everything you need and more. And any more money will really only increase your happiness just marginally. So you also know that extensively buying things is not going to give us happiness long term. We always are going to return to that baseline of happiness. And we're going to talk about that. We all have a baseline set point of happiness, and we'll talk about what that is. And then we can do different things, or different things will happen to us that will give us a little burst of serotonin or dopamine, and we get that feel good, and then we go back to our baseline. And so research recommends that buying experiences over things like going to a concert, getting a guitar lesson, or rock climbing, or something like that, allows us to hold on to those feel-good neurotransmitters for longer than if we were just buying that cute purse. You get this little perk of serotonin, but then it goes away. And so things are not going to necessarily make you happy long term. Science also says that happiness is not about sex. Despite what somebody in your life may tell you, 2.2 times is the number of weekly romps that it takes to send your happiness to its peak point, according to a University of Colorado Boulder study. So people were 55% more likely to report higher levels of happiness when they got busy 2.2 times a week. But anything more than that didn't make them any more happy. So you can just keep that information however you deem it to be helpful in your life. But it's not about money and it's not about sex. Really, our set point of happiness comes from these three things. And so a large body of research comes from the University of Minnesota. They did a lot of studies on twins. Huge bodies of populations were studied. And they discovered that our set point of happiness for most people comes from these three things. 10% of your happiness is determined by your circumstances. This really plays a smaller role than what people originally had thought. Evidence shows that people who face adversity, right, their circumstances, actually are happier in life. And so I think that's great because I had a challenging upbringing, had a lot of things go wrong. But once you have some distance and perspective and you can make sense of that life's challenge, we actually go on to be happier people because it helps shape our identity. It builds us, resilience, grit. You've overcome this thing in the past. And so you're more optimistic about the future. And so the science, this body of science about being in bad situations and not being able to be happy is really reflective of a much positive note than what we would expect. So the other part, this is not good news, 50% of your happiness is biologically determined. So whether or not you have parents that were absolutely negative ninnies does influence that set point of happiness. But guess what? We don't control that. You get what you get when you get your family and you can't do anything about it. So we're not really going to discuss that much. Really, what I want to talk about today is the 40% of your happiness that is determined by your own thoughts and your own actions and your own behaviors. So that's the part we can do something about. A university of, it was Maryland Medical School did a great study that showed that the average person has about 12
You're
to
frozen,
16.
Michelle.
I'm frozen? I hope I look good when I'm frozen. I mean, that would be bad. Am I unfrozen yet?
Yeah, you're good on our end.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I was going to say, usually when you get frozen, you're never doing something very good with your facial expression. And that is utterly embarrassing. So, but 40% of our happiness is controlled by our own thoughts and our own emotions. And that University of Maryland Medical School study showed that the average person has between 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. And of those thoughts, 80% of them are negative and 95% of them are repetitive. So what we do is we have this own repetitive, conversation inside our head, which inside our head, this is our reality. Most of our life takes place right inside here. And this really talks a lot about our mind-body connection. And, this is kind of best explained through a story. I don't buy my kids Christmas presents anymore. They're in their 20s and, it was just stuff anyway, and they didn't really do much with it. So we take a trip. Every year I fund a vacation. And so a couple of years ago, we were on vacation going to go to Utah, and we were at the airport, and we're sitting in the little waiting area ready to board the plane, and they came on and they said, oh, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, there was a rule about the pilot and the crew that were coming from another airport. It was an early morning flight and they had been delayed, and they hadn't had enough regulation rest according to the guidelines. And so we had to wait an extra 30 minutes to make sure that the crew got the allotted rest that they, should safely have. And so you felt a little energy change, kind of in the airport while the people were kind of learning this news. It was like, oh, geez, but nobody really, did too much. But we do have this wait and we board the plane. And when we board the plane, the airline pilot comes on and he says, oh, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, while we were reviewing our checklist, we have something, that's broken on the plane we need to address. Well, the guy to my left immediately pulls out his phone, doesn't even say hello to the person he's talking to, and is like, oh God, yeah, Sleeping Beauty had to get their nap, and now we didn't even check the plane beforehand, and we got to go wait to get something fixed, and blah, blah, blah. I don't even know if I'm going to make it to the place I'm going, and I'm not going to meet with a client. I'm probably not going to get my bonus. This guy's just like losing his stuff over here to this poor person he's talking to on the phone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's this total energy of like, I'm a victim to this situation. Meanwhile, the guy to my right pulls out his phone and I'm like, oh, great. There's two of them on this flight. This is great. And he pulls out his phone and he, immediately is like, hey, honey, there's been a delay. I'm so glad they found it before we took off. I don't know when I'm going to get there, but I just wanted you to know so you didn't worry. I love you. And hangs up the phone. Same situation. This delay in our flight happened to all of us, but what is the lens in which you view the world that is going to determine your happiness? This guy over here is an absolute, victim, and it's happening to him, and oh my gosh. And this guy is like, oh, it's the facts, right? There's nothing you can do about it, and I'm not going to let it, send me into cortisol spiral of stress hormones, right? So we determine 40% of our happiness by what we think and our actions and our behaviors. And that's the biggest thing that you can have as a takeaway today, for sure. So we've talked a little bit about what happiness is and what it isn't, but I do want to talk a little bit about, the evidence behind happiness, because according to the research, it doesn't just feel good to be happy. It's also really good for our health. And so whether you view the glass half full or half empty can actually determine your risk for heart disease. Just as negative emotions such as depression, anger, hostility, those are risk factors for heart attack and stroke when people behave in that way, happiness can actually protect the heart. So researchers, remember, I'm only going to talk about something if it showed up in 30 studies as a valid thing. But one of the researcher studies I loved was done in Canada. And they followed people for 10 years to determine whether their attitude affected their health. And after accounting for the known heart disease risk factors, the researchers found that the happiest people were 22% less likely to develop heart disease over 10 years. In regards to the other people who had more of a negative attitude in their life. Study after study demonstrated that the most negative emotions had the highest risk of heart disease, and people who scored the highest for happiness had the lowest risk for heart disease. Johns Hopkins did a long series of studies, all related to family history for heart disease, the development of heart disease, studies that were over 40 years long, studying people, whether they had a positive outlook on life or a negative outlook. And hands down, this showed up that your outlook and your optimism and your happiness does affect your cardiac health. This also fits largely with a large body of evidence that shows that pessimism is a huge risk factor for poor health. When pessimistic people develop age-related illnesses such as COPD or heart failure or diabetes, cancer, the illness tends to progress faster in people with cynically more hostile type of attitudes. And so this is something that we need to think about, that, having a negative attitude not just affects and protects your heart if you have a good one, but a negative one, if, you have a negative, it's going to make disease processes happen quicker, which is very frightening to me. Happy people are also less likely to get sick because the brain is directly wired to the immune system. Portions of the nervous system connect to the thymus and the bone marrow. And there was a recent study that was done prior to COVID that had 1,900 adults, and these 1,900 adults volunteered to be exposed to the cold virus, the bad flu virus. And don't worry, they were compensated nicely, but the participants were surveyed and monitored for their emotions 2 weeks prior to coming in for this testing, whether they were energetic, they felt good about their life. They came in and then they were exposed to this flu virus. Like they swabbed their noses with the flu virus, put it on their glasses, their cups, food they ate. And those who reported the most positive emotions were less likely to develop a cold. Ronald Glazier did a study from the Institute of Behavioral Medicine in Ohio State University. And his study was really interesting too. He did a great sampling of the blood of medical students, and he found that during stressful times, exam periods, they had a lower acting immune system. Those virus fighting immune assassins were almost dormant during high levels of stress. And so we probably have all experienced this in our life, right? If I get going, I got all these things going on, super high stress, I get a cold sometimes. And this is why, because our immune system shuts down during times of stress. They also studied these medical students during great times, during vacation, when they had a Christmas break, at graduation, and that it's the opposite. So during times of elation, your immune system is high and fighting and in full press, right? And able to do what it's supposed to do. So your optimism and your negativity about life can also affect your immune system. Even more importantly, over 30 studies that I found showed that happiness adds several years to your life. Even more significant is that that is the same amount of time that we say is added when you quit smoking. We tell people, if you quit smoking, you can add 7.5 years to your life. Well, guess what? If you are happy, you can add 7.5 years to our life. And you see billboards all over the place that say smoking is bad for you, quit smoking, blah, blah, blah. But you don't see billboards about mental health and how important optimism is, and how important our mental health is. And it's about time we start talking about how important this is to our mortality, just like smoking. And so being optimistic and being happy can really affect our health also. We've talked a lot about that, but I do want to talk a little bit about the chemicals that actually give us these feels, right? We have this wonderful quartet. There are over 200 some neurotransmitters, but really the bulk of the work comes from the following 4 neurotransmitters. And I want to talk about ways that you can get doses of these neurotransmitters throughout your day, right? New evidence shows that these neurotransmitters are actually made in our gut. So gut health is so important because dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin are made in our gut. When you're in utero, when you're a baby in your mommy's tummy being developed, what becomes our brain stem and our brain pinches off from a group of cells that stay back in our abdominal cavity. And that group of cells, which is the same group of cells as your brain cells, is your stomach. And so your stomach and your brain are the same tissue, and that's why those types of cancers are correlated. If you get colon cancer, you can get brain cancer, right? If you get brain cancer, you are more likely to get colon cancer. You know how different cancers have sister cancers? Well, it's the same tissue, and they're interconnected through that spinal cord. And we need to make sure that we're focusing on our gut health, and we are literally what we eat, because that gut health is so important in the development of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. So let's break these down. Because I'm a nurse and I'm kind of a bit of a nerd, I did develop an acronym if you wanted to remember these: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Pretty nerdy. There is no quiz, so don't worry about that, but it does spell out dose. And so dopamine is that neurotransmitter, that feel-good hormone that is responsible for relaxation and euphoria. And it has a lot to do with anticipation. This brain chemical kind of motivates us to take action. And it's really not surprising that this hormone is low in people who have a lot of self-doubt or are lazy, because they have a low level of this dopamine. So high levels of dopamine gets released when you achieve something. This is why a lot of us like to make a list, and then we check off our things that we got accomplished on our list. What you feel in your bloodstream is that dopamine. That's what floats through us when we accomplish something. So addictive drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine act on the dopamine system too. It blocks the reuptake of that dopamine, and so it kind of stays in the synaptic gap longer, and so you feel that dopamine high. That's what meth and opioids are really doing. So new research also shows that dopamine is released in our body when somebody likes something that we posted on social media. So I posted something on the marketplace to sell, and I thought I was clever, and I thought I was going to attract a lot of attention and was probably going to sell quickly because I was so funny. And when I did post it, I was chuckling that people responded. And I don't know, it does feel good when people like something you post. And what I feel is dopamine when that's coursing through my brains when something is liked by somebody else. So it's super interesting, and I'm sure there'll be more studies come out of that. And that's why so many people are addicted to their phones, is they get this high dose of dopamine coming from, you know, that interaction of on their social media accounts. So the second neurotransmitter that I want to talk about is oxytocin. And this is created with an intimacy or trust and builds in healthy relationships. You know, this is released by men and women, you know, during intimacy, during childbirth. A woman gives off a lot of oxytocin. The easiest way that we can have oxytocin on a daily basis is by hugging somebody. That increase in social bonding, like eye contact or attentive listening, is also another way that you can get just a little dose of oxytocin coursing through your body, which is wonderful. So dopamine, easy way to get it is like making a list and crossing things off. Oxytocin is by giving somebody the attention that they deserve or giving somebody a hug. I don't know about you guys, but I missed giving hugs. I'm a hugger. During COVID, that was something I definitely missed. And I was missing the oxytocin vibe for sure. So the third neurotransmitter is serotonin. I'm getting so excited about it. I said it early. And serotonin flows when you feel significant or important to somebody. This is why so many people fall into gang or criminal activity. That culture of feeling important to somebody else is extremely powerful. And so a real quick way to give somebody else a dose of serotonin throughout the day is gratitude. Handwritten cards, sincerely thanking somebody for, you know, bagging your groceries correctly with the, you know, the refrigerated items together or the canned goods together. You know, one of the things I like to do is praise people when I see them doing something great. I think gratitude is free and it is like little pixie dust. We could sprinkle it everywhere, right? And so I saw a little boy holding up the door for other people at a restaurant, and I paused and took a moment to recognize him and said, man, your mom must be so proud of you, you know, that you're so kind for opening that door. And you could just see that little kid swell up like a tick, right? He was just like so proud of himself. And I gave him a giant dose of serotonin. You know, words are powerful, and I just think we need to use them like magic dust. And so complimenting other people can give other people serotonin. One way that we can get another dose of serotonin for ourselves is being in the sun. UV rays promote vitamin D and serotonin production. And so 20 minutes in the sun and the light can give you a little bit of serotonin too. I actually bought this little light for my office. I used to not have natural light in my office, and it's called a Happy Light, literally from Amazon. It's $15. My office used to be in the basement, and I would turn that on for 15 minutes to get myself a dose of vitamin D and serotonin. A lot of people, you know, have depression in the winter when the sun's not out, and this is where that comes from. They have a low serotonin level. Seasonal depression is what they call it. So it's a legitimate psychological disorder that can be helped with light. The last neurotransmitter that I want to talk about is endorphins. And these are super interesting to me. These are actually probably my favorite. Endorphins are released in response to pain and stress, and they help alleviate anxiety and depression. And the actual word endorphin translates into self-producing morphine. And even more interesting, I think, on a chemical basis, I'm going to nerd out for a second, but endorphins look like opioids in their chemical structure. They're off by one electron, an opioid and an endorphin is. And so very similar response in our body. They're made by the pituitary and the hypothalamus. And one of the easiest ways to get endorphins is through strenuous exercise. We dump our system with endorphins, these feel-good hormones. They diminish the pain receptors in our body. And so there is a lot of value in saying the motion is the lotion for pain. Additionally, there's been other studies that I noted about scents. Lavender and vanilla also produce endorphin release into our body. And then the most interesting body of science, I think, for endorphins is this like spicy food. Like some people love spicy food, and I'm like, that's so weird. And the reason is because you get this huge dump of endorphin after spicy foods or a really cold shower. I think I forgot the guy's name, Wimhoff, I think is what it is. And he recommends ice baths, right? And what he's banking on, what happens is this flood of the neurotransmitter endorphin after a cold shower, spicy food, acupuncture, some sort of pain, right? This painful stimuli releases an endorphin into our body. And so super interesting. I think that running or exercising, strenuous exercise is probably the best way to give yourself a dose of endorphin throughout your day. Hopefully I didn't cover those too quickly, but I think it's important to think about, we all have this set point of happiness. So how can we work in other little things throughout our day? But now what I want to talk about is, we've kind of uncovered what happiness is, why is it important, it's good for our health, how we give little doses to ourselves. But I want to dive into the 4 things that we can do to increase that set point of happiness that we were talking about, right? And so there's this impressive study. It is still going on to this day. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And what they did is they started about 80 some years ago, 85 years ago, and they took 1,000 men, and 500 of them were Harvard medical students, so well off, living in the dorm, having this great life. And the other 500 were desolate men who were, remember, because 80 years ago, it's like the Depression, didn't have running water, the whole bit. And actually, I think it's interesting that JFK, John F. Kennedy, the president, was one of the original subjects because he went to Harvard in this study. But anyway, what happened is these investigators took these 2 groups of men over the course of their whole entire life, and now it covers their spouses and their children and grandchildren are being studied. And what they did was they got every data point on these people. I mean, we are talking physical health, mental health, lab work, MRIs of the brain, personality studies, career, drinking habits. I mean, everything. They even measured the length of the scrotal sac. I mean, I've never seen such a plethora of data. And every 2 years, these people came back and they collected this data, and also now with their other family members. And the fascinating thing is the results, it just floored me. It wasn't the middle-aged cholesterol level of these men that predicted how healthy they would be and how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were with their relationships at 50. The most satisfied people with social interactions at age 50 lived the longest and were the healthiest at 80. It wasn't their blood pressure. It wasn't their cholesterol level. I mean, it's just mind-blowing to me. And, this Harvard study really has determined like 2 big lessons about relationships. Number 1, social connection is so good for us. Good relationships make us happier and healthier, and people more connected to any type of community, whether that's your church, your family, your friends, live longer and live healthier. The other piece that has shown up in this data is that loneliness kills. People more isolated and more lonely than they want to be, right? Because there are those bodies of introverted people, my ex-husband, who, are happy not talking to another human for the rest of their life. They are not unhappy, but those that are wanting to be in interpersonal, relationship, lonely people, they die earlier. They decline quicker when they're diagnosed with a problem, and they die earlier. Loneliness will literally kill. And so things that we can do is, we can, make those social connections, right? We want to make sure that we're not underestimating the power of a smile and eye contact and just a little tiny connection in an elevator or at a doorway. We want to make sure that we're learning about our coworkers. One of the things when in a previous role, I had the emergency department and all of the ICUs and our stroke and trauma department. Well, it's like 800 people reporting to me. That is like too many people to know. And so I would keep notes in my phone about conversations I had with people so I could remember and follow up with them. Man, how's your son? I know he was newly diagnosed with autism. How's that going for you? I know your mom's going through cancer. And it's not cheating. It is using a tool that is at my hand to create meaningful relationships. I would remember that stuff myself if I could, but it was just too much to remember. So we have to be deliberate about it. We have to be very, very deliberate about creating relationships, and making sure, that we're doing things to stay connected, writing little notes to each other. It helps somebody start, a day off right. So number one thing we can do, more than 30 studies show this, nurturing relationships can help increase our set point of happiness. The second thing that we can do to increase our set point of happiness is to intentionally seek out new experiences in our life. Now, I don't, think that we all need to go throw axes every night or, do a scavenger hunt or attend a mystery dinner. But what the science shows is that incorporating these new experiences in our life can help increase our set point of happiness. The other piece that I love that showed up in this body of evidence is the reason new experiences show up is because you don't think about anything else. You find your flow while you're learning this new experience, whether you're doing a scavenger hunt or, this, mystery dinner I mentioned, right? Like you're all absorbed. Well, you get all absorbed when you find your flow. And so whatever that is, running in the woods, if you are somebody that likes to cook, if you're a woodworker, or if you're a gamer, right, that sits down and just gets lost in the game. Science shows you can increase your set point of happiness by doing something every day that allows you to find your flow and forget about everything else in your life. I'm an avid runner, trail runner. I love being in the woods. I feel the most myself in nature. And I literally every morning will say, okay, how am I going to, incorporate this in my day? And it's the one thing I won't get rid of. It's the one thing that I stay totally dialed in and committed to, is being able to find my flow in some way, whether that's a bath or reading a book or whatever. So whatever you do that makes you not think about anything else, you need to make that a priority. It's not just something that you get to do on occasion, because you love it. This is an intentional action to create a higher set point of happiness in your life. So be intentional, try new experiences. Don't just sit at home and watch TV with your spouse or your partner or whatever. It's not healthy. So the third thing that you can do to increase your set point of happiness is one of my favorites. And so happiness research actually showed that we derive more happiness from doing nice things for other people. I love this. It's simply part of our nature to be altruistic, kind, compassionate to others. This was so fun to research because a lot of the studies had children involved, right? Because they were trying to prove that we want to be helpful from the get-go. And so there were some video studies done where this toddler, was sitting in the lap of their parent, and the researcher would drop something or was holding all these things and couldn't open the door. And immediately this child went and helped the stranger open the door or pick up the thing that the person had dropped. And so we are born innately helpful. And we should do these things to help other people. It's really, easy to think that, finding happiness is this like really lofty goal that requires this huge change in your life, but it doesn't. According to research, it is just tiny, small, simple things that can affect your happiness. And so another thing that we can do is, just be kind, right? We can help a neighbor's child with their homework. We can mow a neighbor's yard because we know they had surgery. You can write a letter to somebody who's done something great for you, right, in the past. One of the things my kids and I do, and it's kind of silly now, but it's very impactful for us. We go and we take a bag of quarters and we tape it to the vending machine at the hospital waiting rooms. I work in a hospital, so I have those, right here, either the cardiac cath lab where somebody's having an open heart or the cancer unit, and we sit and we wait and we watch what happens with this quarter bag taped to the vending machine, and we put a little note in there that says, have a Coke and a smile on us. And the science says donating $500 to, this Down Syndrome Foundation doesn't give you that same bang of neurotransmitters or help increase your set point of happiness. You need to see how it affects other people. And so that's the part we love, is you think that money in that bag would just disappear, but people come up and they see it and they have a conversation with other people. Oh God, look at this. Did you see this? And the money they were going to use to buy their soda, they put in the bag and get more money out and use it. It's just this ripple effect. And they talk about these other random acts of kindness that they've seen in their life. And we just kind of sit there and, enjoy, what we're seeing happen with the serotonin, and other people enjoying what they're, experiencing. So writing happy notes for other people on the sidewalk, complimenting somebody in a sincere way. These are all ways in which we can increase our set point of happiness. And then lastly, the last behavior that we can increase our set point of happiness is gratitude. Gratitude is so powerful. This was more than 30 studies. This was meat and potatoes of how you can increase your set point of happiness. Gratitude enlarges your prefrontal cortex over time, and it can boost your mood for like over a month. There was studies with Gretchen Rubin. I don't know if you know her. She's actually a local Pembroke Hill high school student that went on to write books about happiness, just absolutely amazing. But Gretchen Rubin's studies showed that writing a letter of gratitude to somebody and reading it to somebody else can have a profound impact on our set point of happiness up to 5 months. It's not just like feel good right now. It's like later on even. And I don't know if you guys follow Brene Brown, but Brene Brown, I think, is brilliant. And she said that, in her 12 years of research, she never interviewed a single person with the capacity to experience real joy who didn't also practice gratitude on a daily basis. There is a scientist, Segelman, who did a lot of studies about gratitude at Penn University. And the single most effective way to turbocharge your joy, he says, is to make a gratitude visit, to go see a teacher, a pastor, a grandparent, a nurse, a coworker, and have a conversation with them, to verbally express your gratitude that you had. And that can last up to 5 to 6 months. And so absolutely fascinating work. I think there was 50 studies that showed how much gratitude can help our happiness set point. And so the biggest tool they say to use is a journal. You can write up to 3 things on a daily basis. And at first, I started doing this. I'm going to be completely transparent. I started keeping a journal about things I was grateful for, and it didn't really affect me at all. I was like, okay, I'm not feeling any more happy than I did before. And so I kept digging into the research, and I was doing it wrong. I was being lazy about my gratitude. I was writing things like, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my coworkers, like superficial stuff. And if you're going to do this practice, you have to, throughout your day, change the way that you view the world. And so all day long, I'm looking for things to be grateful for, because I know tonight I'm going to tell myself what I'm grateful for, these 3 things. And so it literally changes the lens in which I experience my life, because I'm always looking for things to be grateful for. The example I like to give is, sometimes when I'm sitting on the couch and I'm preparing for a talk or looking at my slides, my son notices, he's 22 and he still lives in the basement, kind of like a little pet. He's smart, he's going to college and saving money. But he'll come by and he'll kind of squeeze my shoulders and say, Mom, you're going to do great, right? And it makes me feel seen. It makes me feel understood. He knows my angst, and he's just really supportive that way. He'll write me a note in my lunch, when I've got something big that I've talked to him about coming up that I want to do a really good job. And just those little things. I'm just so grateful for the soul that he is. And so I'll write those little things that he does in my journal. And, I've been doing this for years now. And this journal, I'm on like 3 volumes now. I like to think my ego likes to think that someday my kids will like fight over these journals that are like basically my life, right? Of like all these things that I've experienced that I'm grateful for. And it just really tells a story. And it's wonderful for me to flip back and think, a year ago, look at all this wonderful stuff that has happened to me. So gratitude by far is one of the most important things that we can do. So we I've talked about how happiness is in our control. It's our thoughts, it's our actions, it's this internal and external communication that we have. And that's what really ultimately dictates our happiness. Research shows that we can increase our set point of happiness by working on nurturing relationships, having new experiences or finding our flow, helping other people, and being grateful. So emotions are absolutely contagious. Just like a virus, they can affect the other people around us. So happy people tend to lift other people up around them and their mood. And I hope that you guys take a little bit of something away from this talk. And I'm grateful that you allowed me to share. Hopefully something, as I said, is something you can start or stop doing. And I am grateful and would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I think we have a couple minutes, but I'm not sure. But I will be quiet to allow for somebody else to share if anybody else has got any comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So I had also put in the in the chat that they could text out the message or they can raise their hand. We also have a group that's in our conference room. So Lori's in with that group. I'm on my laptop in my office, so I'm monitoring the chat. So I think we're a small enough group. If people want to just raise a hand and unmute and ask your question, either way you feel comfortable. We'll start the questions now. Again, Michelle, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing this wonderful topic, because I think you cannot hear enough about why happiness is important, especially with all the different things that are happening in our lives. It's just a really a wonderful reminder. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. And the point is the intentionality of it, right? The intentionality is, according to science now, what will increase your happiness, but doing those things, right? We can know it, but putting them into action, that's the key.
You do have a thank you in the chat. They loved it, and thanking you so much for that.
Good. I'm glad. I love to share. I'm glad to see that my 2 years of reading and learning went to good use to somebody else. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
Lori, do we have anyone?
Well, not now. I did have a question, Michelle. This is my second time. 2 of us were hearing this, and I definitely picked up some new nuggets of information. And I love the fact that you said as you brought this information together, that it had to show up 30 times in research, and I think that's really impressive. The question that I have that I didn't catch the first time we saw you at the aging conference, it's the connection between the brain and gut, but you talked about that tissue, and that to me is that's something else. So can you so the same tissue that's in the gut is in the brain, and so is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. And so when you think about, like, people say, oh, my gut instinct, I felt this with my gut, right? Well, that makes absolute sense, right? Because we think with our brain. Well, you can think with your guts. It is a literal organ made of the same tissue. And yeah, when I learned that too, I really started to pay more attention to what I was eating. I was having a lot of gut problems but I was also eating like a whole bag of Nerds and surviving on licorice alone, and things like that during my shift. And so, that having a healthy biome to be able to create, and there's a whole nother line of research that studies all the health that goes into that biome of your gut lining, and what you can do to create more serotonin and the feel-good neurotransmitters. I actually want to develop a talk about it but it's just this newer science. If you ever watch TED Talks, if you go to like www.ted.com, there's all these like little scientific research little talks, like 10 to 15 minutes long. And if you Google that, there's some really good TED Talks already out there if you want to learn more about that biosphere and what you can do to make it healthier. Oh, I love that. Somebody commented there's a publication, Healthy Body, Healthy Brain. Okay, sign me up. Well,
Michelle, I work with a lot of limited resource audiences, and sometimes I see them and they're not at their best, they're not at their highest and their best selves. So if you had, I mean, I know there's so many things, and I love the gratitude and doing something, but when you're in a position where you're stressed and you're really not sure how you're going to make it from day to day, what is something that I can share with the audience that I work with?
yeah, I think mindfulness is one of those tools and breathing exercises that we have with us at all times, right? In our tool belt. I mean, I personally am a square breather. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but you picture the square with the, 4 in and you hold it while it's in, and then, out for 4, and then you pause it after you exhale. I think teaching those breathing exercises is probably super fundamental. I've also worked with a group before, a Silver Sneakers group, and one of the things they did is before they had to say something negative, they had to compliment somebody else. When they were like being worked up or whatever. So they had this like compliment rule, which was, I thought, highly entertaining. But it did work for their group, because what they had found is that they would get together and they're all complaining about their health, or complaining about this, or complaining about the weather, complaining about whatever. And so they really had to change that mindset. But I think breathing is scientifically based as one of the best tools that we can always have on our body to help us. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you for that. Yes, I'm definitely a mindfulness fan, and practice it personally and share it as often as I can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Any observations, any thoughts?
I think we're good here. Just a lot of good comments on on the presentation. Very
Okay.
appreciated. Great stuff. Lots to put
Wonderful.
into
Well, I hope you guys have a great day, and thank you so much for allowing me to share. I appreciate you. Every time I get to share it, it brings it to the forefront for me too, right? And it's just one of those things we all need to be cognizant of. So you guys have a good day.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and everyone have a very good day and stay safe.